Hi and welcome back to Architects Not Architecture. It's been 2 weeks since our last event of this virtual world tour, and we have been looking forward to meeting you again. Today we are having the great honor to welcome our speakers Lyndon Neri and Gong to our virtual stage. We are doing this event live from Germany. My name is Fermin Tribaldos and I will be your host for the next 1.5 hours. Ready? First things first, what is Architects Not Architecture? For those of you who are joining us for the first time, let me briefly introduce our format.
At Architects Not Architecture, we do not focus on architectural projects, but on the individuals who designed and built them. We often know the projects and awards of renowned architects, but what we often miss out on are the people behind them. It is them and their unique personal history which influence how they work and what they create. So we try to bring to the stage what too often remains unseen. Today, our speakers will talk about their career paths, their influences, and the experiences that shaped them and made them become who they are today. And the main rule is, they are not allowed to talk about their own projects.
Before the pandemic, we were doing in-person events in various European cities. Although we really miss meeting our community in a real auditorium, we are extremely happy to now reach people all over the world. So thank you for joining us. With this virtual world tour, we are taking you on a tour around the globe to meet some of the most influential architects of our time and get to know them on a personal level. Make sure you follow our social media or sign up for our newsletter on our website so that you don't miss any upcoming events. The next stops will be Mexico, UK and Denmark, but today it's time for China. This event is kindly supported by Jung and Mossa. Both of them are very active in China. We thank them for their trust in us and our work. We have video messages from them, and let me start by passing the mic to our partner AnA from Jung.
What do people talk about when Jung and architecture are mentioned in the same sentence? It's about color, shape and style, about materiality, directions, taste and encounter. Since 2006, Jung has been providing a platform for an in-depth discussion of architectural themes and related social issues. Nationally and internationally, a contemporary form of professional exchange has established itself beyond the usual communication structures. The Jung Architecture Talks are not an expert-only format. This regular event program is synonymous with lively discussions about vibrant topics in architecture and with networking taking place in a pleasant atmosphere.
So my experience with Jung Architecture Talks has gone over almost a 10-year period, and I've seen it grow from something that is just very local here in Germany to something that actually draws in a lot of interest also from outside. It's now an international architecture talk.
For 3 years now, Jung has been supporting all international Architects Not Architecture events in addition to the Jung Architecture Talks. Since we all can't travel as we used to, we are joining the virtual AnA tour around the globe as well, where we all can visit selected cities and virtually meet some of their most relevant architects. After all, architecture generally lives from the power of images, so please enjoy.
We would also like to mention our media partners, Position, Good, Arquitectura Viva, and Design Boom. Position is at the same time our broadcasting partner for China. Today we are welcoming our speakers Gong and Lyndon Neri, who will join us live from Beijing and Shanghai. Each of them will have 30 minutes on our virtual stage, 20 minutes to give a talk, followed by an up to 10-minute interview. After the two talks, we will have a round of discussion where we will ask some of your questions, so make sure you get ready and use the box on our website to send in your questions. You will find it on the right side when scrolling down. And that's the plan for today. Before we start, let me pass the mic to our partner Nico from Moza.
Hello everyone, my name is Nico Meelkoop and I'm Business Development Manager at Moza Tiles for Asia and the Middle East. In case you have never heard of Moza, we're not new to the market. We have been producing tiles for floors, walls and facades for more than 135 years from right here at this location. However, as one video says more than 1,000 words, I would like to show you a video as an introduction to Moza.
Moza has designed, developed and produced ceramic tiles in Maastricht since 1883. We enable architects and designers around the world to create signature surfaces. Sustainability is our foremost priority. To achieve this, we adhere to the cradle-to-cradle philosophy, which helps us make a positive contribution to our society, our economy, and our planet. All of our products are made using the purest raw materials and have outstanding recycling potential. We save energy and water and create excellent social conditions. Our cradle-to-cradle products contribute to a healthy indoor climate and are VOC-free. In addition to having positive national and international material scores, our products contribute to building labels such as LEED, BREEAM, DGNB, and HQE. This underscores our commitment to looking beyond tiles. We look at the whole, at the surface, the space, and the user. In this way, Moza is making a positive contribution to society, the economy, and the planet for current and future generations.
Our first speaker was born into a Chinese family in the Philippines. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from the University of California at Berkeley and a Master of Architecture from Harvard University. Together with Rosanna Hu, he founded Neri & Hu Design and Research Office in Shanghai in 2004, one of the most dynamic and acclaimed design companies in China today. Their work has been recognized by an endless list of prestigious international awards spanning the fields of architecture, interior, product and graphic design. Alongside his practice, he has been deeply committed to architectural education and has lectured across the globe at various university and professional forums. Together with his partner, he started teaching at Harvard Graduate School of Design the fall semester of 2019 and taught at Yale School of Architecture as the fall 2018 Norman Foster visiting professor. They also founded Design Republic in 2004, a retail concept store based in Shanghai that offers a unique collection of products created by the world's best design talents, many of which have never before been made available to consumers in China. It's a great honor to have him with us today. Welcome, Lyndon Neri.
Hello, I am Lyndon Neri from Neri & Hu, and I'm extremely grateful today to be part of Architects, Not Architecture. So it's interesting. This is the first image of me and my grandfather when I was 4. Special image here because a year later he passed away. So he was very special to me. And to give you a little recap, my grandparents were from Qianzhou in Fujian. It is literally about an hour south of Fuzhou and about 2 hours north of Xiamen. In many ways in Fujian, it has the highest GDP because there's a lot of diasporic Chinese that goes to the Philippines. that goes to Indonesia, that goes to Singapore. And so my grandfather first moved to the Philippines, as a lot of Chinese did in that particular period of time. Didn't go to the major city in Manila or Cebu, but went down south. If you look at that map, it is that red dot. Actually, it is the south of the Philippines. Most Chinese do that. They go to one city and they feel like if there's a lot of competition, they go to the next city. And then when there's more Chinese, they go to other city. And so Quanzhou today, extremely rich in culture. And there's a reason behind that. This was the first store that my parents and my grandparents, they didn't really speak the language. They only speak a Chinese dialect called Fujian. And so that's my grandparents and my dad. Actually, interestingly enough, if you look at the sign, some of them are in English, some of them are in Malay, some of them are in Chinese, not in this one, in Spanish. It's called Farmacia. You can see that. It's actually an Edwards Fine Furniture. Is my uncle, their youngest boy, so they call it Edwards Fine Furniture. And you'll see later why I have a furniture store here in Shanghai. It's kind of probably in the DNA, interestingly enough. This is my older brother and me. I like to make things ever since I was a kid. I also like to draw. You can see this is me in the picture right there, to the third, to the right. And my sister was not born then, but I put my sister to the right, the image there during my graduation at Berkeley. My sister is an amazing graphic designer who also worked for us for many years, or worked with us. I went to a Chinese school in the Philippines. This is 1972, if you can read Chinese. And this was when I was in kindergarten. And so you can kind of see there's a mixture of a number of, we had to learn Spanish, a little bit of the Filipino language, and of course, Chinese. Interestingly enough, during that period of time, President Marcos and Imelda ruled the Philippines very strongly. Marcos became the president in 1965. And Imelda in the 70s commissioned many amazing projects. And there's one of my favorite was actually Tanghalang Pambansa, which means the cultural center of the Philippines. It's by Locsin, Leandro Locsin, who also went to the GSD. Probably one of the most famous Filipino architect. Coincidentally, this was photographed by Simone Bossi, who also photographed our latest project in Paris. So it's kind of interesting if you were to look at the fate of sort of the transitional period of our time. But at that time, aside from Japan, the Philippines was really quite powerful and very rich. Then I went to prep school in the US. I played basketball. You can see the Sports Illustrated there with the yellow thing. I was initially a Portland Trailblazer fan. Then I became Golden State Warriors fan. Not when they were winning, when they were losing. There was this guy called Lloyd B. Free, and I used to call myself Lyndon World B. Free Neri. And you can kind of see, here I am, small. Obviously, Curry changed the whole game. Unfortunately, 20 years too late. It's great for short people, but at that time, you know, with my height, there was no way it was possible. These are my drawings in high school. I always loved to draw, but then again, you know, being raised in an Asian family, specifically Chinese school in the Philippines, it was all very realistic. So I was not encouraged. It was not until I went to Berkeley, I lied to my father. I told him that I was studying engineering, when in fact I was painting in the art department. My first instructor was Joan Brown, part of the Bay Area figurative movement. She unfortunately died from her own sculpture in India. That was really sad and very sudden. During that period of time, the Bay Area figurative movement had people like Richard Dibincorn and Manuel Neri, not related to me. He taught at UC Davis, but also at the same time would come to Berkeley periodically, and I took classes with him. I was, however, very curious with what's happening in New York, and that was with Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. Robert Rauschenberg, purely from its sort of the idea of collage. And this was my first year at Berkeley when I start to sort of venture away from realism and start to say, what if I start playing with this notion of collage? Of course, my dad decided to come to the US, and I kind of panicked, and because I lied to him that I was in engineering school and I had to transfer, and there's no other place, but architecture school was the only way that would accept me. And so I transferred literally across the street, which is Worcester Hall, designed by Eschrick. But during that time, there was this strong influence by MLTW, which is Moore had just left, stepped down, Donlin Linden, Richard Whittaker, and William Turnbull, and of course, Joseph Eschrick was there. That was really strong, the Bay Area influence. I was, however, more interested with what Jim Jennings, Mark Mack, or Stanley Sadowich, I mean, they were looking at houses by Schindler, by Eames, the Koenig houses. So it was sort of that LA, sort of Bay Area kind of conflict. So I'm constantly in this place of conflict. And it was interesting because my junior year, there was this man called Michael Graves who came to Berkeley. And I remember they had to move that lecture hall from the architecture auditorium, which only sits about 200 people, to Wheeler Auditorium, which sits about 750 people. And I remember he walked in and he was doing the competition for the Klaus Pegasus. And at that time, he was competing against Mark Mack and Andrew Beatty, Daniel Solomon. Robert Mangorian was teamed up with James Turrell. And I remember him going in with a cloak and a whole group of people, and someone screamed, goes, Mr. Graves, how does it feel like to be the Jesus Christ of architecture? And that was shocking to me because I've never really seen this kind of work, this kind of drawing, the proficiency. During that particular period of time when I was an undergraduate, there was a man called Yong-Ho Chang, who became the dean at MIT, probably the first. He was in graduate school at Berkeley at that time. It was interesting because right after, during the graduate program, I was really fascinated because some of his projects were really quite intriguing and dealing with a lot of issues that I was not used to. And when he came out, he did this project, which was the bookstore that had wheels as apparatus. And I thought that was really fascinating to have a Chinese architect coming home, going back to Beijing and doing something rather conceptual. Before I graduated, this was the first time I saw Salk Institute, and that was when I was really in awe, and I realized, whoa, the power of architecture. It's not just about fanciful drawing, but really the power of space. And then obviously I went to the Graduate School of Design. This was when I was on my younger days, and you can kind of see the map when I went from the East Coast to the West Coast to the East Coast. That was a time when Rafael Moneo, I came in towards the tail end of Rafael Moneo's chairmanship at Harvard. He was revered and he was feared. He was also my thesis advisor. But at that same time, there was also another duality. I was dealing again with another kind of tension because he brought in Rem Koolhaas, and you can kind of see you're either the OMA camp or the Rafael Moneo camp, and you have to choose side. There were also, even between the reading and the publication at the GSD, you have Wilfred Wang, who talked about tectonics, 9H, and talks about sort of details, spaces, and then you have Michael Hayes, who deals with narrative, conceptual ideas. And so assemblage and 9H were dealing with two different issues, and yet that tension was good for the school. These were the seminal work that was influencing at that time, people like Alvaro Siza, Heinz Benfield, the Herzog de Meuron's earlier work. And I remember the exhibition by Miralles that really shocked me to my core. How could a drawing be so full of energy at the same time, had so much life? All of a sudden I realized, well, architecture could be really extremely spatial. And of course, Peter Zumthor came to play. He came to school later, 2-3 years later, and started teaching at the GSD. I remember that he decided to have his studio at the Carpenter Center because he thought that the GSD, the building was not good enough. Therefore, he was going to teach at the Le Corbusier. And this is when I graduated. I got married after my graduation. To the left, again, there's that tension. I'm showing you sort of the duality in my life, the constant tension. I was married in a Julia Morgan building, which is really sensitive. And to the right was my reception, which was in the Roach Deacon Law Oakland Museum. So you can kind of see sort of the brutalist, modernist, and the sensitive Bay Area kind of architecture. It was also that time I was in a shop full of snow, you see, to my waist. That's when we moved to Princeton. That's when Rosanna went to graduate program. I worked in New York for 2 years. Here, me and Rosanna, very young. We were naive, a little stupid. And 2 years later, Rosanna's like, I'm so tired of constantly picking you up in the train. Please try somewhere in Princeton. So there was only one office, and that was Michael Graves. So you kind of see that was my office, a little bit messy with drawings all over my table. And also at that time, you can kind of see the influence. Michael was friends with Aldo Rossi, Ettore Sottsass, and he was really much influenced his drawing by, you know, Di Chirico and Morandi. And obviously this was also a way for me to start thinking. And I traveled with him to Asia, different parts, competition in Singapore, exhibition in Japan. And obviously Michael has a lot of strong influence on us. Sort of the Renaissance movement was really preeminent in a lot of the way he thinks. Sort of Tempietto and Cloister by Bramante resonated well with me. How a small building could be so significant, and yet at the same time, the opposite, which is a cloister rather big, can be really small. This is our first house in Princeton, New Jersey. This was when Michael came and we were commissioned to do 3 on the Bund. This is across from 3 on the Bund, the building before it got renovated. And you have to remember the first time I came here, even though 3 on the Bund was an amazing project because I love to eat and I love to cook, I realized that the soul of 3 on the Bund was the art gallery. And I have to give credit to a man called Handel Lee. He was the visionary behind the project. And he partnered with someone named Wong Ling, which a lot of you know. And this was the first in which you have people like Zhang Xiaogang's work, and you have people like Wang Ningde's photograph, and you have people like Zhou Cunya's work, The Green Dog. And I still regret today because I wish I bought that green dog because it was so cheap then. It was offered to me and I'm thinking, how could a green dog be 20,000 US dollars? But now, of course, it's a lot more. But you see the bloodline, you see a lot of these work. So I was working on that project and we were asked to move here to actually run the project to complete it. And so this was a month before I moved to Shanghai with my 3 kids. My youngest was 3 months old. Now he is about to go to college. So that's how time flies. And then during my time when we moved here, SARS hit. So it was supposed to be 6 weeks. It became 4 months. And then I stayed in Shanghai for 10 months to run a project called 3 on the Bund. And obviously after that, I resigned and I started my practice. You see the practice when we had 6 people at that time. And it was also very disturbing because the city was a major construction site. You know, the word Cai was everywhere. You can kind of see everywhere in the city. And yet, despite sort of this whole kind of negative energy, there was also a positive energy. Shanghai became to me a sense of community, a place where people actually gather together, which I find interesting. But having said that, then I realized sort of the issue of how the urbanization is changing. Jia Zhangke's movie called Film Steel 24 City, and the idea of Kantab Nadir's notion of photograph in Chongqing, and the idea of altering the texture of daily life, giving rise to new notions of urban leisure. All of a sudden, what is commonly seen as leisure in parks, all of a sudden you're under freeways. Very interestingly, so issues like memory and loss and pain become important to us. Work by Louis Bourgeois, work by Mona Hatem about displacement, about not having her own home, and obviously Rachel Whiteread, the place in East London, a cast of an existing building that was demolished. And obviously the idea, our obsession with repetition and typology, the Deutsch School of photography, the idea of sort of repetition and layering typology, the dogmatic insistence and studies of type became something important. And obviously, we were fortunate enough to invite Candida over for one of the talks at the Festival of Design. We didn't have projects when we started. So we were rather foolish when we came here. So when we left after being here, after 3 in the Blend completed, I resigned from Michael Graves after 10.5 years. So I did products. I did small objects, small things. I did publication. Rosanna and I did publication. We did a book called Persistence of Vision, which was published in 2007, interviewing 50 different architects, famous, not famous, local, international. As long as you are practicing in China, we will interview you and we will film you. And it was at that same time we came across a book called The Future of Nostalgia, written by a Harvard professor called Svetlana Boym, and the notion of reflective nostalgia. And we find this quite interesting as an apparatus. She argues that perhaps nostalgia is not so bad if it's not seen in a restorative vein, but rather from a reflective vein. And if you see it from a reflective vein, that perhaps it can inform you of a possible future, that it longs itself and delays the homecoming. And with that, this was actually good reading before we embarked on our first project. This was obviously before Waterhouse got transformed. This was the existing, and so we actually became very conscious of all the existing condition in there. And you can kind of see how we worked. I like to draw ever since and so what I do is I do a lot of drawings. This was part of sort of sketches from Waterhouse and from product, and you can kind of see the influence by Aldo Rossi, a little bit of Alvaro Siza. Many of sort of the influences are seen in sort of a lot of my sketches. But during the same time, when we were building our practice, granting we didn't really have that much architecture initially, there were a lot of prolific architects practicing. One of them will be the speaker tonight after this, which is Gong. The library in, we call the Lonely Library. But at the same time, there was also Li Hu and Huang Wenxing from Rice and Princeton. You have people like Ma Yansong and Hua Li from Yale, and you have Zhang Ke from Harvard. And all of them coming back to, this is what I call the practice coming from the north, mostly from Tsinghua, and obviously architects from the south, people from Wangshu, Arch Union, Liu Yicun. There are more, obviously. I'm just giving you an example of sort of the breadth and the wealth of architects practicing at that time. Interior product design, not so much. Graphics, not even. But when it comes to architecture, there was a real experimentation of vibrancy to that place. But it was not just China. If you look at Southeast Asia and you look at South Asia, you see people like Bangkok Studio, you see Vo Trong from Vietnam, you see Marina Tosbom, you see Studio Mumbai, you see Woha from Singapore, and of course, my dear friend Andra Martin, who is really, in many ways, needs more attention globally. And so with that, you know, with the idea of sort of this old and new that we had to deal with, we start looking into Carlos Scarpa more. We didn't look at them seriously in terms of dealing with old and new. You know, Quirino, Stampiglio, and Castelvecchio, and obviously Leverage in terms of enigmatic in form and in terms of materiality. Having said all that, obviously Jeffrey Bauer in terms of dealing with new tropical modernism and how architecture and landscape comes together. And I remember seeing Maison de Vere for the first time in E1027 by Eileen Gray, and I realized, whoa, this is interesting, sort of the idea of total design. And when we talk about total design, again, our work, we're limited to a lot of interiors, so we decide, why don't we create a platform? Why don't we bring the best of what the world can offer in terms of furniture to China, and hopefully one day to be able to bring back the best of China back to the world. So we created a store for furniture, but at the same time, we also created this sort of forum, this lecture called Festival of Design. It's on its 7th year right now. COVID last year, we didn't do it. So we invited many speakers, including the speaker that's coming after me, Dong Gong. Obviously, we had some people like Zhang Yonghe, people like Zhang Ke, and obviously we also have people that are Asian counterparts and sort of internationally product designers, architects, industrial designers. And the last few years we've concentrated and we've gone back to the US to teach. This was in 2018 at Yale. It was interesting because this was actually a year before Henry Cobb passed away. So it was good to be in that same review with him. You see Peter Eisman in there. and obviously at Harvard, being in reviews, having our own studio, dealing with issues that we're interested in, and reconnecting with peers like Mauricio and Sophia, Kirsten Gears. I hardly see Zhang Ke and Stan Feng in China, but then when we were at Harvard, I actually see a lot of them. So it was a great reunion. Obviously, to close this 27 years after graduation, I was able to see Rafael Maneo last March before COVID went really crazy, hand him our first monograph. And he was kind enough to say he's willing to write the foreword for our second monograph, which is coming out this summer. So we're extremely excited. This is our office. This was my drawing, a photograph and pastel drawing with ink on top as my Christmas gift to a number of good friends around the world. And I close this with a quote by Carl Gustav Jung in relationship to sort of the situation we are in. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Lyndon.
Thank you.
It was beautiful. Wow, so many insights in only 21 minutes.
I had to rush that really quickly, so I was on a marathon.
That was beautiful. Thank you a lot for your time, for participating. We really appreciate it. And it's nice to see, of course, as a Spanish architect, Rafael Maneo.
He's 6'2". That is 184, I believe. Yeah. So he's very good. He plays for his team in the US, and I'm hoping that he would continue. So I would go to the park in here and play it against some guys with him along, and often they look at me and they say, "This old man can't play." That young kid is very young, and I would bet them with money, and oftentimes we would win.
And tell me, everything okay? Kim, can we go ahead? Do we need to change the position of the cameras? All right. Thank you for your passion, Lyndon. Now that the issue is solved, we wanted that question about basketball was not that serious. We wanted to ask you the first question, of course, about Rosanna. We have read in many interviews that you are quite different. How is the collaboration between the two of you?
Rosanna is an extremely organized individual, extremely intellectual and extremely logical. She thinks before she opens her mouth. She doesn't have a temper. She's very calm. She manages the offices very strongly. I'm out of control. I'm emotional. I get excited. I lose temper. So I like, sometimes when I don't get my way, I get really upset. I walk out of meetings and she stays in meetings. She thinks oftentimes when you come to the office, because I always smile, most of the staff think I'm the nice one, and she's very serious that she's the serious one. But if you work here long enough, you will know that I'm the crazy one. We are very different, but we are very similar. We're both, we sort of, space is very important, and sort of the tectonic of architecture is very important. He likes to think, she likes to write, I like to draw. I'm into basketball, she's into music. We both love to eat, we both love art. And so it complements, and I tend to be a bit more on the conceptual schematic side. She's very good at DD, and I come in during construction again. So we kind of play different roles.
And you play different roles, but is there something you would like to learn from her?
Oh yeah, patience. She's very resilient and extremely patient. She gets things done. I have a lot of ideas, but sometimes I get so frustrated, and I would just walk away because I feel like it's compromise. I'm too much. We're both idealistic, but Rosanna is idealistic in a practical way. I'm idealistic in an unreasonable way.
That sounds great, and that's a good quality to learn. You mentioned the expectations from your parents. At that time, you even changed the university. So your parents had big expectations on you. What expectation do you have on your kids?
You know, I have actually quite the opposite, precisely because my parents, they're typical Chinese parents. So they want us to either be, economists, engineers, doctors, or lawyers. I mean, people say that a lot, but it's real. For me, it was engineering. I was good with math and I was good with science when I was young. Thank goodness I'm not in that field. I actually have the opposite. I told my kid, in fact, I would tell my kid, my daughter is an extremely amazing painter. She's in her second year at Harvard right now. And she's thinking of economics. She's thinking of, I said, why are you going to economics? Why are you studying? Why don't you do painting? And I will support you. So I have the opposite. I feel like my kids need to really pursue their passion. But maybe there needs to be an in-between.
That sounds very nice. You also mentioned during your presentation that at your beginnings, you struggled getting new projects. Right, and you do the book, products. In one previous conversation, you mentioned that last year you received 300 requests, and you only selected a couple of them. Which is great, but it was not always like that. What advice do you have for young practices that struggle to get new projects?
I think to be true to yourself. I think to really understand that architecture is for people who really are passionate about what they do. It's not a place to make money. It's not a profession to make money. And if you want to make money, you might as well buy stocks or go to real estate or do all these other things. I think you need to have a commitment and a passion to be able to go through the difficult period, and be true to yourself. Don't try to be something else. Be really passionate about what you do, and don't look at the trend and see, well, this is, the trend that architects today are doing one thing and therefore I should do this particular style. You should be true to what you really think is true, your own conviction. And
actually, we have one question from the audience, which is if you think creativity is innate.
Interesting. That's a very, very good question. I would not know that answer. I think there's two components to it. There's creativity comes in different fashion. What is really creativity? Some people say you're good in drawing. Some people you think creatively. Some people who are good in drawing might not be able to create spaces. And some people who are created spaces might not be able to draw. And some people might be creative with their words. They're good writers. I do believe that what's important, what's innate in human being, what is needed is every society needs musicians, artists, architects, writers, because they represent sort of the thinking of a city. If it's just full of business people and lawyer, then the city does not have a character. It doesn't have its strength. So I do think there is also one aspect that could be trained, the discipline of it.
That's very interesting. Also, your last quote during your presentation was beautiful, and one of the advice we have read about you is one from your dad. In an interview, you say that humility is the most important thing. Why is that, and how humility helps you as an architect?
You know, I always believe, and I've said this many times, I'm a man who believes that there is a God above. People often say that because maybe you were brought up in the Philippines, it's an extremely Catholic country. But I do believe that there is a higher being that gives us this opportunity and gives us this set skills and give us this talent. And a lot of us are given different skills to be able to contribute to the world. And oftentimes the noises and the praises of this world confuses us. And sometimes we start to think that we are greater than who we are. And as architects, I think this is very important. When we're given a platform, when we're given opportunity, you know, oftentimes I turn to Rosanna and I often have a very simple prayer. You know, I said, God, who am I that you are mindful of? Who am I that you are mindful of? That you give us so many opportunities, so many projects. These are platform for us, not just for us, but for a group of us to be able to explore issues and be able to help and give back to humanity. And I think humility is key. I think if you think yourselves more highly than who you are, then I think the practice is in jeopardy.
That sounds very honest and very nice of you to hear that. Also, you have a team of about 200 people. Some of your former members are being also successful with their own practices now, so you can see how it grows, right?
Yes, we don't have 200. I wish we have 200. No, we only have about 100.
But
yes.
with Design Republic,
with Design Republic, yes, with Design Republic, yes, Design Republic, we have maybe about 170. With that's a completely different company, different group of people running the business.
But still,
yes.
A lot of former.
Yes, we have seen a lot of architects, product designers, interior designers that have started their own practices, and I'm very happy to see them doing well. I get worried about them just like a father would, and oftentimes I would ask them how they're doing, whether they have enough work, because I think there's that sense of responsibility, both Rosanna and myself.
It was wonderful to listen to your talk and see your presentation. Thank you a lot for your time or your kind participation. We look forward to the conversation with Gong in about half an hour. But first, thank you a lot, and we'll see you later. Thank you, Lyndon.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Before we start with our second speaker, I want you to do something. I want you to pick up your phone, open Instagram, and search for Architects Not Architecture, so long, or simply scan this code, Architects Not Architecture, and now press follow. If you are based in China, you can visit our website or simply scan this code to sign up for our newsletter. Now you won't miss any of our upcoming events. Thank you for supporting us. Our second speaker was born into a family of intellectuals in Beijing. He received a Bachelor and Master of Architecture from Tsinghua University, followed by a Diploma and Master at the University of Illinois. During his studies, he received several awards that recognize his excellence. He founded his own practice, Vector Architects, in Beijing in 2008 and has become one of the most active young architects in China. During its first 13 years, the practice has focused intensely on the issues of sight, light, and making. Vector Architects has realized projects of great elegance and refinement that have received global acclaim. Apart from that, he has been invited to various major exhibitions, including the 2018 Venice Biennale, and has won international awards such as 100 plus Best Architecture Firms selected by Domus. He has been teaching design studios at Tsinghua University since 2014, was elected foreign member of the French Academy of Architecture in 2019, and in the same year appointed as visiting professor at the University of Illinois. We are very excited to welcome him to our virtual stage. Welcome, Gong.
Okay, so it's my turn. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation by Architect, not Architecture. And today I would like to show you two very important experiences through my architecture path. They're actually very tightly relating to the two places I listed in my title of the presentation. One is the North Gate. It's actually referred to my first university in Beijing, Tsinghua University. Another one is the cornfield, which refers to my university in the United States, which is the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. There's one thing I'd like to address is that instead of showing photographs, today I'm going to use drawings and paintings to share my experience. I used to draw a lot, and I keep on doing so till today through my architecture practice. It's almost become a parallel, continuous line alongside architecture. All right, so the first story is the Tsinghua North Gate. This picture was taken about 30 years ago, and this is the area right out of the north gate of the campus. Back to that time, it's still a very rural, primitive farmland with some very tiny villages scattering around. But now it's already very different, occupied by a lot of dormitory buildings because the entire area right now is belonging to Tsinghua campus now. It's a kind of urbanization process, very typical in China through the past 30 years. And I have to introduce you this guy, Professor Hongzhi Zhou. He was my teacher of the art course when I was in Tsinghua University Architecture School. Back to that time, as an architecture student, we have to take art course. For example, pencil drawings or watercolor drawings. But because we're not fine art student, so the training is more towards a kind of skill of painting or rendering rather than the pure artistic expression. But Professor Zhou Hongzhi, he wanted to do something different. He actually selected a very small number of architecture students among the whole school, no more than 10 people, to form, we call this an art group, a very tiny group. And then he took us out of the campus to the North Gate area of the school every weekend, mostly on Sunday. And he asked us to draw on the real site surrounded by the natural setting. So back to that time, it's the farm field, very primitive and very powerful. For me, I think it's the very first threshold to really contemplate what the real art is about and what is the relationship between art and artist, the art and architecture. Because normally when we're on the site, Professor Zhou will ask us to really observe the site, to see the space and to feel the space and to express the true emotion and the mood. It's very different than the training we received inside architecture school. So for me, this is almost like a turning point through my learning process. And this is a series of drawings. You can tell it's the same piece of field, but we have to draw it over and over again. Of course, in the different climate, different time, and different mood. But with this kind of training, it's really helpful, as I reflect it now, to start establish a kind of emotional connection between myself and the space surrounding me or the site. And it might be very crucial even for my later architecture practice, because every time when I go to a site, I think it's the sensitivity of an architect, how you observe the site and how you discover and how you learn from the site. So this is a series of drawings I did back to that time. I still remember this one. It's right after a pouring rain, and we just quickly pick up all the gear and then went to the field to capture the last minute of the sunset while the cloud is still flying around the sky. And I use watercolors, I use ink sometimes, and use pastels as well. So this is also showing you the same village, but you draw it from different angles and over again. It's really a very meaningful learning process for me. That's a funny picture. Lyndon might know that the guy on the left, Hua Li, who is also very important architect now in China. At that day, I just finished one of the paintings and came back to the dormitory and met these two guys. They just finished their commercial renderings. They get quite a lot of money from that. So we took a picture together. This by charcoals. So you might feel that there is some impact by the Impressionist, because it's almost the same way of drawing, to really go to the real site and to feel the air, the light, the atmosphere of the site, and you draw it live. That's been snow. And within that period of time, I remember it was 1996, also encouraged by Professor Zhou Hongzhi, I traveled to Tibet. Tibet was a kind of wonderland for the architecture students back to that time. It's not only for architecture students, it's for the entire culture. This anybody related to the culture and art, we dream to go there. And back to that time, it's still a little bit dangerous because of the cruel condition of the traffic or the living conditions. So after you go to Tibet, you get almost like a warrior certificate. You're somebody. It's very different from now, because the road and the airplane is very convenient at this moment. So there's a series of sketches and paintings I did in Tibet. They're all very quick because the weather there is very unpredictable. Sometimes along the process you're doing your painting or drawing, it will be raining or there will be big storm. So they're all very fast, but kind of, I don't know, it's very different than you just take a photo in front of something. It's really get a much deeper impression into your mind and heart comparing you just to take a photograph. Yeah. So these are all the drawings. And a year later, after I come back from Tibet, I did some in-house painting and drawing based on some photographs I took throughout the journey. So this is a couple of the images. It's the in-house painting, but it's based on the memory of that journey. All right, so I moved to my second very important and influential experience, which is the cornfield. It was during 1999 to 2001, which I had my second master's degree in University of Illinois, the Urbana-Champaign. It's in the middle part of the United States. And if you know that school, you might know why I call this cornfield, because the entire campus is surrounded by a large area of cornfield. So I use this as a nickname of that place. And this is the second person I like to introduce. He is Professor Henry Plummer, and he eventually became my thesis advisor during that 2-year program. Well, I cannot express my grateful feeling to him, because before I went to that school, the education I received in Beijing about architecture is more about the practical part of architecture. For example, the program, the circulation, the form, the composition. But he is the guy who took me to another realm of architecture thinking. It's more about this intangible part of architecture, the natural light, the atmosphere, the ambience, the mood, and the time, which is very tightly relating to my today's architecture practice and architecture thinking. Is still the very important and intriguing keywords for me today. And the first part of his program is an excursion study around Europe, because I was an exchange student in Munich, TUM, which is a very good school in Germany. I stayed there in the summer semester, and I got a list from Henry Plummer. He pointed out all the important buildings I have to visit. So every weekend, I have to travel around and then go to the building, particular building, and also use the hand drawing to record, to depict the very moment of the light condition of that building. So this is a series of sketches I did through that journey. This is obviously the Bregenz Museum by Peter Zumthor in Vienna. And this is just a contour line lit by the natural light. And I stand against the light. It's in the English Garden in Munich. So it's a very touching moment, which had a very I had a very deep impression with throughout this travel. And this is a series of conditions of light and shadow. Some of them are in the cathedral, some of them in the museum. This darkness in a very historical building in Vienna, and very important, famous plaza in Munich. And this is actually one day when I came out from school, I look at the wall, there's a shadow casted by the natural light. It's the tree, it's the same tree, but because the leaves are in different distance to the wall, so you start sensing the darker tone and the lighter tone of the leaves. So at that moment, I just catch that with my hand drawing again. And this is the tunnel, a very intriguing light moment in the Munich subway system. In the section of the subway which is based on my imagination. And some specific moments of light condition. On the right side is the Ronshan by Corbusier. the church in Vienna, and on the right side again is Peter Zumthor's the temper installation in the Hanover World Expo in the year of 2000. And this is a very important museum in Munich, Pinakothek. And I study different ways that light is filtered from the sky to the exhibition space by the section type of the architecture, and create a different kind of quality in the atmosphere of the space underneath. And the second part of his program is when I go back to United States, I have to finish a design project, which is a museum. I still remember it's a museum along the Chicago River. And the name of the project is a place of silence, just establishing a kind of certain ambience in architecture space with studying the light. So that's the major topic of that course. And again, all these drawings, all the renderings, presentations is by hand. This is a particular detail. It's one small light opening, and I use the hand drawings to study the different time, and the light condition will change. So the texture, the ambience, and the shadow will change as well. That's one of the corridors in the museum. It's a meditation space, the darkness, and the penetrating light and shadow, layers of walls. Yeah, that's all the space in some particular area of the museum. So for me, that's the two most important turning point. It really changed my path through my architectural learning process. So this is something I like to share with you guys. And I started my own practice since 2008, Vector Architects, 直向建筑. And ever since, I keep on carrying on this habit of hand drawing, because for me, it's almost the most effective tool of architecture design. I have to correct myself. It's not only tool, I think. I think my hand somehow is parallel with my brain. It's really not only execution or a tool of my brain or of my brain thinking. Sometimes I cannot even figure who is leading who. My hand is ahead or my brain is ahead. So it's very intriguing for me. But I think it's very interlocking and interrelating relationship between my hand and the brain. This is a series of sketches I did recently. Some of them are based on the study of a site. Use sketches to build up this kind of connection between architect and the physical surroundings. And some of them, it's an imagination of space, even before we have a scheme. So it's a very initial atmosphere of the space. And some of them is very conceptual. It's not even showing you a clear configuration of the space. Yeah. And some of them are the research of some, this is a historical building in China, a very famous temple. So hand drawing can make me to get into a very detailed research of this historical information. And some of them are purely problem solving. All right, so that's all for today.
Thank you a lot for your presentation. So now we can start the interview. Thank you a lot. We really appreciate your time, and we are very honored that you both are participating. That's a very nice presentation with so many drawings. I wish I could draw like that. That would be nice. But even at the university, I couldn't do that well. That's very nice. You mentioned how drawing, being outside and having being passionate outside and drawing help you to have that connection, the emotional connection with the site. And I remember in a previous interview, you mentioned that that you say that during the design process, there is a lot of a struggle. And I quote you, every project is a kind of a painful process to me. What is it that brings you pain and struggle?
Well, I think for me, it's a very normal process, because in the beginning, there's a lot of problems and issues you have to face, and it's all in your brain. And little by little, you try to interpret them and try to understand them. And for me, it's a chemical reaction. I think the design is not like there's one problem, I solved this, and there's another problem, I solved that, and add them together, it's becoming an architecture. Design is not like that. Design process, it's a melting process first. All the problems have to be diffused or melt in your brain, and all of a sudden there is a good idea. You can make an integrated solution. So, so it's very hard to predict when you can come up with that idea. But every time when you accumulate enough energy and time, sooner or later that idea will come up. But throughout the process, for me, sometimes it's really a struggle. Yeah,
it sounds like a very personal process for you. How do you share it with your team at the office?
We have a certain way of how we try to push the design forward. For example, in the beginning, we do some site study, we do typology study, and then step by step, different architects within the team, they will try to think about their own solution, and then we talk about it, we discuss about it. And in some cases, some of the idea from my team can really inspire me, but sometimes I have to purely rely on myself. But anyway, it's a procedure, but again, it's hard to predict what moment you have that feeling, there's a click, that I got it. I think this is the difficulty of architecture. Yeah.
I also remember in that interview that you mentioned that the only way to achieve high-level architecture is by taking it very personally and emotionally. My question is, how do you deal with setbacks personally and emotionally? A competition that you don't win, or a very interesting project that isn't being realized in the end?
Well, of course, emotionally, that's a loss. And that sometimes is hurting. Last year, we were participating competition in Shenzhen, which is a very major city in China, but eventually we didn't get the project. It's normal. It's part of the life of architects, but we just have to face it. Yeah. But sometimes I think it's interesting, whenever you come up with a specific idea, even though the project for some reason is dead, but that idea, it somehow will be rooting your heart, and that might affect some other project, even though it's not literally using the idea. But this kind of accumulation process for architect is also a self-learning process, I think, which is important. Yeah.
We had also similar answer to this question, and it's very nice, interesting that you take it with you, this learning. What is where do you find the most joy about being an architect? Not that much joy.
This is a big question, but I can tell you that I think architecture has two different stages. The first stage is the architect design architecture. So there's a certain standard and the target, you have to approach it, and you have to try to be as close as possible in order to achieve a certain quality for a specific architect. But the second stage of architecture is after the architecture started to be used by the regular people, and the space will be engaging with people, with the weather, with the vegetation. So it's a lot of factors, very hard to predict by the designer. But because in the recent years, we have this experience to really, watch this process. For me, it's amazing process, how when you finish a space and you see the regular people, how they interact with the space, and you see how the rain will wash the wall and get this patina in the material, and you see how the vegetation will grow. For me, I think that's probably one of the most joys as an architect, to see your architecture really grow, so.
That's very nice. One last question that I wanted to ask is regarding your upbringing in Beijing, and how your relationship with the Tsinghua, bad pronunciation, Tsinghua University, influenced you as a thinker, not only as an architect.
Well, of course, there's a very fundamental influence by that school. The Tsinghua University is ranking #1 architecture school in China. And the influence I get from that school partially is from the faculty, from the professor, and of course the Professor Zhou Hongzhi I just mentioned. But there's another very important influential power from that school is by my classmates, by my friends. And Lyndon know that. Actually, during the couple years older than me or younger than me when I was in school, many of the graduates right now, they're becoming great architects in China. And we talk to each other. Sometimes we discuss architecture or art or even some other issues. I think that's a really energy we stimulate from each other. We keep on growing and making progress, which I really appreciate.
Actually, Sang Ke is one of them, right? I don't know if you studied together or almost.
He's 1 year older than me, and we're really brothers. We're very close to each other when we're in school. We actually live literally in the same courtyard. We all rent a particular room within that yard. I still remember it's quite a joyful memory throughout my.
That's very nice. I would like to ask Lyndon to join the conversation so that we can start the roundtable discussion together. So, thank you, Lyndon, for being with us. If you can come a bit closer to the camera, because you're a bit, yeah, thank you. It's an honor to have you both together, and thank you a lot for your time. Is there any question not related to projects that you always wanted to ask each other that might be today the best day to ask that question?
I go first?
Sure. You go first.
I go first. Well, Lyndon, there's something really amazed me about Neri Hu, because as you just talk about your experience, you're really international based in terms of your culture, your knowledge, your everything. But now you stay in Shanghai for your practice. How you handle this balance? I don't know if I express myself clear. Do you see yourself as a Chinese architect, or you see yourself as an international architect? I'm very curious about.
Nice question.
Yeah.
Lyndon.
But first of all, I'm a big fan of your work, so that's why I'm curious.
It's a very good question. It's interesting because when when I was growing up, I was born in the Philippines, educated in Chinese and Chinese schools. And so that was never my home. I always feel like I was a foreigner. When I went to the US, I tried very hard to acclimate. You could see I play basketball, and I tried to speak English as proficiently as I can, but I was always considered not American. And so it's interesting because when I came to China, for the longest time, people always call me, well, they're not American. He's not Filipino. Maybe there's a term called Huaqiao. Maybe he's diasporic Chinese. And I know for Rosanna, who was born in Taiwan, she was really frustrated because in many ways, we were told by our parents, in fact, my grandmother, when I came back to China and decided to come back to China, my grandmother said, I now can leave. You have gone home. You are now back home. I'm very happy for you. And so that was really emotional for me. And it was the first time coming to a country wherein people accept me for who I am. This was the first time I've experienced this. And maybe for someone who's born in China, you take it for granted that being Chineseness. But if you are not born in China, like me, and you're Chinese outside of China, there is always a dream to go home. And you will always be in a foreign land. You will never, people in the Philippines, people are darker than me. Eyes are bigger. In America, the hair is blonde and not black. So that has always been a struggle for me. And then when we came to China at one point, naturally, because we were not born here and educated here, a lot of people didn't really think of us as Chinese architects. But I always tell Rosanna that I think what's important is to do good work. And naturally, people will come be sensitive to the land that you are given, to the place that you have been bestowed. And so it's interesting, people often say, are you reluctant ambassador of Asian Chinese architects? It's interesting because when I go to the Philippines, people ask me, are you really Filipino? I speak the language and people say, are you Filipino? And then when I went to the US, people say, are you really American? And so it's what Zaha Hadid called the identity complex. Zaha Hadid is not Iraqi, is not considered English. And so she says, what the heck, let me just be myself and do the best. And that's always an interesting issue. I know one thing, I have come home, and this is the best feeling. After many years, I have come home. After 30 years sort of roaming around, I finally came home. And I'm very happy, and that's the reason why it was important for me to have my children grow up here. And they all speak fluent Chinese, bilingual completely, and they left after they go to college, because to me that was very important. When I finally saw them argue in Chinese, then I realized, okay, I'm now finally at home. So yes, so that's to answer your question, Tong Kong, that would be it. But in terms of from an international point of view, it's also an interesting question because it is actually an interesting phenomena because people now is asking us to go back, and actually sometimes, we don't really know the issue abroad. So we have to really relearn the new projects that comes to our plate.
For me, I think it's something that's very intriguing about your practice, and also your, as a friend, I know you and Rosanna. I think you're capable of being inside of this particular culture. At the same time, you can keep a certain distance to really be very sober. You know what I mean?
Yes,
I think that's the interesting balance. And sometimes for a very local Chinese architect, it's even harder because I know what you're saying, and I, to large degree, agree with you. But for some very local architect, sometimes it has another difficulty to,
yes,
to have that kind of clear vision. Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, you both experience during the last decade saw huge changes in China, and at the same time, you both studied abroad. That gave you probably this kind of reflection. Lyndon, you talk about nostalgia at the end of your presentation, but in terms of reflection, what could people like me, I have never been to China yet, hopefully soon after the pandemic, but I will. What can we learn as an architect from China? Gong, would you like to go first?
Well, I think Chinese architecture condition it's in a very particular moment, because if you look back to the history, the contemporary architecture design started not more than 20 years. So I'm talking about this very, after this opening up the entire country, the relationship between the Chinese and the global situation. So I think for us, the positive thing is they're full of energy, partly to do with we have many projects going on. So we have many opportunities to test, to make effort. But at the same time, well, I think it's an unclear situation because there's not such a common standard. What is the good architecture and what is the bad architecture, and people do things upon their own belief. But it could be it's an interesting situation comparing with, for example, Japan or, for example, Switzerland. When you look at those architects in a particular area, they almost have a very common goal. Everybody is trying to achieve that. Of course, somebody is doing better, somebody is doing a little bit worse. But in China, we don't have that yet. We are kind of struggling, but it also means energy and opportunity. That's my vision to the current Chinese situation. It's very different than any other place, I think, around the world. Yeah.
Lyndon, what is your opinion?
I actually think today China reminds me of the time of the Renaissance. This is the first time in a long period in human history that architecture are allowed to play with interiors, to play with product design, to play with graphic design, and truly be interdisciplinary. And you see a lot of architects playing in sort of within this, not because they're trying, because they just kind of want to play, but there is truly a need. You see in a lot of work in vector architects, Gong's and Zhangke's work, wherein there is a humanity to the interiors and architecture. It's not just a freestanding piece. And so, it was interesting because, even though I only know Gong for 4 years physically, I know Gong and Zhangke and Huali's work from a distance. And in many ways, maybe for 10 years, I feel there's that connection. There's that connection and sensibility to work. And I always feel amazing that, I know these group of architects before even talking to them. And after I talked to them, it almost just very natural. It was almost like as if, brothers that we have not met for many years and all of a sudden came together. We could talk about Chinese issue. We could talk about international issues. We could talk about architecture. We could talk about interiors. We could talk about furniture. Oftentimes I would tell Gong that, you have an amazing restaurant. Why did you have someone else do the interiors, And I would tell the client, because we know the client, I'm like, why did you destroy Gong's building? And I'm very honest about the whole process, because just like, he's like my little brother, I have to kind of protect him as well. So I think there's that energy, as Gong is saying, in China. I think that whole Renaissance movement is happening. And I just hope people take advantage of it for positive purposes and not for greedy purposes.
Mm.
If you can't do it, then don't do it. But I think there's a lot of people who are capable, even younger people, younger architects today that are quite amazing, facile, and not just architecture, but their ability to do interior spaces and also product design.
Mm. That sounds great. Looking forward to visit China too. Gong, sorry.
Technically, can I add something?
Yeah, of course. Please.
According to your question, I think there's another very interesting thing as an architect to practice in China, because China is a very large country. Even though we call it China, but if you do some design work in the south side or the north side or east or west, sometimes they could be totally different culture, lifestyle, climate, geographic features. So this is challenging, but I think this is something really interesting for an architect, because you have to really carefully examine the specific condition sometimes you're not familiar with, and it could be very stimulating in terms of producing a good architecture design, because it's all fresh. Yeah.
Actually, Gong, if we visit China, we need a list like you received from your teacher at that time. So basically, we have to visit. We have a question from the audience, which is also related to one we have prepared, and the question is, going back to your beginnings, what are the takeaways from the first years of running your own practices? And we have a question also related to that. What lessons have you learned through the experience of your practice that you would have loved to learn at your beginnings? So takeaways from the beginnings and lessons that you have learned through the practice and you will love to learn, you will have loved to learn or to know about in your beginnings. Gong, would you like to go first?
Your question is your lessons you learned in the beginning of your
yes, the lessons you learned during your first years.
Okay, all right. Well, I think not necessarily first year, but the first couple years, for me, I still recall it's not an easy period of time, but I think the persistence is very important. The persistence of a kind of value and the quality of architecture, because it's easy for young practitioners, architects, because of lacking of the opportunity. Maybe they just design some projects for keep on operating the office rather than pursuing the real pure architecture quality. But the interesting part is, if you somehow, we call this like a surrender, later on, it's very hard for you to get back, because the market, the clients, and all the whatever, the circle around you will envision you as an architect in that kind of area, but not as a truly good architect. So it will take you sometime maybe 10 times of energy to come back to the right track. But that's my feeling, that when you talk about first couple years of practice. Yeah,
that's a nice topic. Nice advice. Lyndon?
For young architects who are starting today, I think we should not have prejudice on typology. I think oftentimes as architects, if we are trained with a big A, we want to do museums. We want to do schools. We want to do cultural center immediately. And, you know, the China condition sometimes doesn't allow you to do that. Probably ask you to do a clubhouse, probably tell you to do a karaoke bar. You know, it's interesting because Mies van der Rohe, when he went to the US, immigrated from Germany. You have to remember he was sort of from that kind of mentality with Walter Gropius, and he was commissioned the Seagram building. the office building was considered a no-no. It was considered only for the rich and not, this is not social housing. And he was given Farnsworth House. Are you kidding me? A private house? You gotta be joking. I mean, it's so against his ethos, his belief. But he did the best. He changed the notion of what Farnsworth House is seen. He pushed the boundary of what office building could be in the Seagram building. And all of a sudden, everyone sees it differently. So I challenge younger generation to really look at the typology that's given to them. It might not be seen as cultural because there's only limited cultural projects out there. To take it and say, maybe I can break boundaries with the typology that's given to me. And maybe, you know, you will be the Miss Bandero of karaoke bars, maybe. Okay, so I think we need to have that kind of mindset. And I think, otherwise, you will always be waiting for that perfect project. And you'll turn around and you're in your 40s and then you're like, what am I doing? You know, no project, nothing. And so I think it's important to be able to use your set skills to be able to start to break boundaries with the typology given to you.
You're a good example of that, being flexible at your beginnings as an interdisciplinary practice. We have also another question from the audience, which is also kind of similar. The question is, what is your biggest regret in your career? Who wants to go first? Gong, would you like to go first?
There seems like there's nothing jumping up into my mind when you talk about the regret. I think, well, sometimes the entire process will be smooth, but sometimes you will meet some difficulty. It's just very normal. Seems like I can't recall something I can't really get over as a regret. Yeah.
And Lyndon?
I'm usually a very positive person, so I'm very happy with what is given to me. The competitions we lost to, which we lost. Gong said he lost one. We've lost many, so we've won a few, but we've lost also a lot. And I'm usually positive. I think I take it with me, and sort of the ideas is with me. I think maybe one of the regrets sometimes comes from time to time. It comes. I love to paint. I always wanted to be a painter, and oftentimes I look and I said, could I be an interesting painter? And oftentimes it comes back, it creeps in. And of course, my sons, would tell me, you would be a bad painter. Don't worry, you'd be a better architect. So it's always the kid that tells you the truth. But sometimes I do. I really purely find joy when I paint and I draw. I do need to ask question to Gong. I do need to
Go ahead.
Yes, I did, because that's not fair. He just throws that thing onto me.
It was a very deep one, his question.
Yes, this question is going to be interesting because it should be outside the work. So actually, Gong, you said once, I believe in questions that are eternal. I believe in questions that are eternal. And I love that phrase. I love it because I do believe in sort of the eternal as well. In terms of life, in terms of sort of humanity, do you believe this eternal is a journey by yourself or a journey with a partner?
Well,
I was gonna go there.
So far at this moment, I believe it's about myself. It's about myself. It's really a journey of experience. I just trust it. I believe in that. It's really about the self-accumulation, and you understand more and more, you know more and more. And it seems like you can get closer to somewhere, but seems like you can never get there. I like that kind of feeling along the process. But
it's like Leonard Bohm's idea on reflective nostalgia. Yearning, but never quite getting there.
Never get there. Yeah.
So maybe the other question, which deals a little bit to project, is the sense of permanence, which I appreciate. A lot of your work have a sense of permanence, not just sensitivity, but a sense that you do want to build things that will last, which is the antithesis of a lot of things that's happening here in China. So oftentimes, as your project gets bigger, the time is still as fast. How do you keep your team to still instill this notion of permanence amidst the speed, amidst this sort of society that's against everything we believed in, which is about permanence, about sensitivity, about materiality, about a true expression of architecture?
Well, first of all, I can't agree more. I think that there is permanent value in architecture. I think that's probably the most important meaning why architecture is so important to human being. It can give us a sense of where you're from and a sense of security. But at the same time, of course, I have to say that architecture has another side, which is adventure side. It's a safety and adventure. So it's kind of a balance between these two. And according to your question, first of all, ask more time and more design fee from the client. As long as you have current fame in architecture field, of course, you already did that. And we are trying to, if we get bigger project, we need more time. Some even smaller project, we get almost like 3 times or 4 times in terms of the design schedule, the time comparing with the condition 5 years ago. So we try to put more manpower, more energy of design and more time, but at the same time, ask more money to sustain it. That's the simple rule. But I think this is just the fundamental value the architect cannot compromise. Otherwise, you lose the essential quality of being an architect. Yeah.
That is a nice answer, and also what was a very nice question. Maybe one of the last question, if you can answer with a short answer, might be, what is your definition? You have both a great practice, very well established, internationally known. What is for you the definition of success?
Of what?
Success.
Success.
Lyndon, would you like to go first?
Sure. I always use this phrase by the French philosopher, and I think I'm going to use it again because I truly believe it. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, he once said, "We do not aspire to be eternal beings. We only hope that things do not lose its meaning and purpose." I think success is if you find your true calling in life to have meaning and purpose that you give back to the society, and live a life not of angst and anxiousness, but have a sense of peace and true joy. Not money, not fame, but to actually be content and be at peace with the things you are giving, because it's genuine, it has meaning, and it has purpose. That to me
sounds great. Gong, what is your definition?
For me, success probably means the self-satisfaction. Could you be satisfied with your own status? That's very important as a person or as an architect as well. But as an architect, for me, I think it's quite challenging that, naturally you accumulate a lot of things, but can you still challenge yourself? Can you still don't do things in your comfortable way? Again, back to your question, previous question, can you still have the sense of struggling, criticize yourself? I think that's probably, for me, it's the best status of an architect. Keep on challenging the way you used to, and keep on open your eye to the new things and fresh things. Yeah, that's my answer. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do.
Mm. Thank you. This is a very nice conversation. I wish we could do it for an hour. It's a wonderful opportunity to have you both participating. Since we're probably going to repeat this virtual world tour next year, probably one of the stops will be again China. Would you like which architect would you like to see participating? Lyndon?
I think Zanke would be interesting. I think you should talk to Zanke. I think he would shed some interesting light. Mm.
And Gong?
My recommendation could be Dash House in Shanghai. I don't know if you know that firm. Liu Yichun. Yeah, but he might need a translator, but I don't know. And Hua Li,
will make it.
We mentioned him. We're very close friends, and they're all the best architects in China. So, yeah.
We are very thankful for your time, for your kindness, participating in this format. Hopefully, we can do it in the future in a real auditorium so that you see the faces and you enjoy it because you deserve it. But again, we are thankful that people from many countries of the world are joining us and are able to watch it. Thank you a lot for your time. Thank you also to our partners, of course, Jung and Mosa, but also to your teams. Serene and Hank did an amazing work coordinating it and making it possible. Thank you also to our broadcast guy who are Kim and Fran from Chile right now. Thank you a lot. Really enjoyed. Hope the audience also enjoyed it, and have a nice evening in China.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Talking with you guys.